There have been a lot of interesting military units in United States history, and perhaps one of the most fascinating and intriguing one was that of the Mormon Battalion. Now, the Mormon Battalion was comprised of 500 men or so from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they served from about July of 1846 to July of 1847, right in the middle of the Mexican-American War. Now, one of the reasons they served was to get their families further west. In February of 1846, they fled religious persecution in Illinois, headed west and settled near modern-day Council Bluffs, Iowa. And when they saw an opportunity to maybe appeal to the federal government for funds to help them further west, President Polk actually sent a military representative to meet with Brigham Young and his leaders to basically strike out a deal and say, hey, if you provide 500 men and create a battalion to proceed down towards San Diego to potentially fight in the Mexican-American War, you can utilize those funds and everything to basically move your families. Brigham Young really saw this as essentially a sign from above that this was the right thing to do. So they mustered just over 500 men and began the march. The Mormon Battalion is best known for its over 2,000-mile march, which took place from about the summer of 1846 going into 1847. And that was about the length of service that the unit served, from July of 1846 to 1847. And they made this over 2,000-mile march from modern-day Council Bluffs, Iowa to San Diego, California. Now, about halfway, they did have some folks fall ill, had to break off and head to some other areas. But once they did make it here to San Diego, they were, at least for a time, stationed at a location known as Fort Stockton, which is where I'm at today. And you can see behind me the views of San Diego back there in the distance are quite phenomenal. And at the time, Fort Stockton, which is now a California State Historic Marker, it was used as a campaign headquarters to end the California Revolt in 1847. And that Mormon Battalion actually stayed here later in 1847, and it was ultimately abandoned in September of 1848. I'm not sure if any of these entrenchments and embankments are original to Fort Stockton, but they certainly look like a military built. It may not be original at all. It may just be how the landscape is here. But when the Mormon Battalion set out from Council Bluffs in mid-July 1846, they were under the command of U.S. Army Captain James Allen. Accompanying the 500 or so men were over 30 women and over 50 children. On August 1st, the battalion arrived at Fort Leavenworth. There they were organized, received their weapons, and collected a $42 uniform stipend. Unfortunately, recently promoted Lieutenant Colonel Allen fell ill and died at Fort Leavenworth on August 23rd. Lieutenant Andrew Jackson Smith took command until the battalion reached Santa Fe in October, when Lieutenant Colonel Philip St. George Cook took command. While in Santa Fe, 91 sick men and most of the women and children proceeded to Pueblo to recuperate and spend the winter. From Santa Fe, the rest of the Mormon Battalion was tasked with establishing a wagon route all the way to California. This made for grueling work and took the entire winter. In December, near the San Pedro River in modern-day Arizona, the Mormon Battalion was overrun by a herd of wild cattle, of which they killed a dozen or so. This became known as the Battle of the Bulls. Interestingly, this would be the only engagement the battalion took part in. On January 29, 1847, the Mormon Battalion finally arrived in San Diego after marching over 2,000 miles. These men worked throughout Southern California for the next few months before the unit was officially disbanded in July 1847. While this long march was a remarkable feat by itself, the Mormon Battalion made many more contributions. For example, it is the only religious unit in U.S. military history which was recruited from one religious body and having a religious title. Additionally, some of these men, after arriving in California, worked at Sutter's Mill, where gold was discovered and where the gold rush of 1849 kicked off. Perhaps more importantly, their establishment of a wagon trail throughout portions of the American Southwest greatly contributed to the eventual cession of much of this region. Essentially, the United States fought to acquire more land and borders further south to ensure that these already established routes became part of the United States. Next, I head over to the Mormon Battalion Historic Site in Old Town, San Diego. This site, though not directly related to the battalion, offers a free guided interactive experience detailing the history and contributions of the Mormon Battalion. I didn't end up filming inside because I did not want to take away from the experience. But at the end of the tour there is a small museum with artifacts related to the battalion. This includes a few rifles and a sword that were carried by members of the battalion, one with the name even etched into the stock. There's also a really interesting canteen carried along on the march that was painted by the member after the fact. Additionally, there was a brass cannon that was purchased from John Sutter and brought back to Salt Lake City. Alright, I'm not far from Old Town San Diego. I'm actually in Point Loma, visiting the Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery. Now this cemetery was established in 1882, and today is the final resting place of over 120,000 individuals, a lot of those being military veterans. In fact, it's actually the final resting place for two people who made the over 2,000-mile march with the Mormon Battalion from 1846 to 1847. Alright, and this is the grave marker and final resting place of those two individuals, Private Dunham and Lydia Hunter. They were actually originally buried in a cemetery in the La Playa area of Point Loma, and in 1887 they were moved here to Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery. And here on the back of the marker it actually gives a little bit more details about Lydia Hunter and how she passed. It says, Lydia Hunter died from complications resulting from the birth of her only child, a son named Diego Hunter. It also says that Diego was the first American born in California, born on April 20th, 1847, and Lydia dies 6 days later. You know, I also really like what it says here at the bottom. May we honor her and each of those women who served with the Mormon Battalion. We also pay tribute to the many others that sent their sons, husbands, and brothers into the service of their country during the war with Mexico in 1846 to 1847. Not far from the Mormon Battalion monument is this amazing granite obelisk monument that caught my attention. Now this monument is actually dedicated to 66 men who were killed aboard the USS Bennington on July 21st, 1905, when one of its boilers exploded here in San Diego Bay. And today these men are remembered and buried here at Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery. I thought I'd end my journey exploring and learning about the Mormon Battalion at a site that is quite literally sacred. In January of 1847, between 38 and 40 Luiseno Indians were attacked and massacred here at this site in Temecula Valley in California. And this was carried out by a group of Californios, who were settlers within California that were of Mexican and Spanish descent. Now this massacre was actually retaliation for another massacre that occurred weeks before, known as the Palma Massacre, in which Luiseno Indians actually killed multiple Californios. And all these chapters and events and engagements were all part of the larger picture, which was the Mexican-American War. Now, what does this site have to do with the Mormon Battalion? Well, on January 25th, 1847, the Mormon Battalion, as part of their march from Council Bluffs to San Diego, passed through the Temecula Valley. And they actually reported seeing the Luiseno Indians burying their dead right here on this spot, which is now known as the Pechanga Sacred Ground. And they were burying their dead in mass graves here at this site. And interestingly, the Mormon Battalion actually provided protection to the Luiseno Indians to ensure that they were able to bury their dead in peace. And part of this is because the Luiseno Indians were actually allies of the Americans during the Mexican-American War. Now, what's interesting, this site today, which is about a half an acre or so, is surrounded by this black wrought iron fence, as you can see. And what's really odd is it actually sits amidst, it doesn't look like it from behind me, but it actually sits amidst a massive shopping center and surrounded by neighborhoods and everything. So I'll do a quick pan around here, but you know, in the early 2000s, there was actually a legal case brought by the Pechanga band of the Luiseno Indians to preserve this site. So a gentleman basically bought this site and planned on developing it. The town of Temecula planned on developing it. And, you know, they knew historically and due to archaeological digs in the 90s that this site was, you know, where most of those Luiseno Indians, again, between about 38 and 40, they're not sure the exact number, where they were buried. So in order to preserve this sacred site, it unfortunately had to go to court. And thankfully, they were able to preserve about a half an acre here. You know, and if you were driving by or you didn't know the area, you would never know that this site was here, which is absolutely wild. You know, being here at the Pechanga Sacred Ground and seeing this site, you know, it really is just a reminder of the complexities of our history and of war in general. And it just goes to show, you know, when you think about the Mexican-American War, most people don't think about, you know, a mass burial site for Native Americans, but, you know, here we are. And when I set out on this journey to learn more about the Mormon Battalion, you know, I never expected to be in Temecula Valley at a site like this. So, again, it's just a good reminder to always look a little bit deeper into our history and go to that next level, and, you know, and kind of understand there's so many different layers and so many different things that go into our history, which is pretty fascinating. So, for now, we'll be wrapping up our chapter on the Mormon Battalion and headed out for our next journey.